Hi. I want to give a quick introduction to Edward Wilson's Biophilia, which is going to be the reading that we have for Friday. You're reading the first 55 pages. Um, if you haven't read Edward Wilson before, then I'm glad to be able to introduce you to this writer. He made his name through the study of ants, and he has tons of scientific papers about ants and how they communicate. You'll actually get a little bit of a glimpse of that in one of the chapters for this reading. He's ancient now, so if you look him up on YouTube, you'll see him, and he must be like 85 or even in his 90s. I don't know, but he's very old now. But he's written a steady stream of books over the years. Those include Biophilia. This is one that I think is really a standout for the care and attention with which he puts it together. But then, a couple dozen at least other books that he's written. I start with this book because I think it begins to get at the kind of blending that we're about in this class. How do we think about religious traditions in line with the natural sciences, and not trying to think of them as these two distinct areas that never blend, but as two ways of thinking about the world that have a lot of overlaps if we stop and think about the what's at the heart of these disciplines. Wilson has for years been interested in discovering how these different levels of knowledge interact with each other. Again, that's something you'll taste in the chapters that we're reading today. It's also something, one of his most famous is this book, Consilience, which is actually about how all these different layers and levels of knowledge come together. So you get a little bit of a taste of those theories in this book. Now, what does this mean, biophilia, the title? Well, bio is going to mean life, right? And then philia is love of. So he's talking about a certain response to the natural world that he sees as innate in human beings. And if you look to the prologue of Biophilia, you'll see him define this exactly. The object of the reflection of this book can be summarized by a single word, biophilia, which I will be so bold as to define as the innate tendency to focus on life and lifelike processes. Let me explain it very briefly here and then develop the larger theme as I go along. And what he's going to be doing is that human beings evolved in the natural world. There's something about our minds that are geared toward understanding the natural world. We're innately curious about creatures, about the things that grow, things that change, the movements of living things. Our mind was geared to understand those things more so than trains or hang gliders or sports, whatever the case may be. Our minds are uniquely set to understand the categories and the way that the natural world works. And so the study of life is inherently fascinating as far as Wilson is concerned. Now, you may end up disagreeing with that, but he would say there's something very innate about our natural attraction and interest in the natural world. And then he says at the end of this prologue, modern biology has produced a genuinely new way of looking at the world that is incidentally congenial to the inner direction of biophilia. In other words, think about the implications of this. Biology isn't just, one out of 20 majors or something like that, but it is something that is uniquely fit to the curiosities and the drives of the human mind. All right. And I think you'll get that taste as you move through this book of that there's a fascination and a wonder that we can find in the natural world. And I would ask you to look for moments when that kind of bleeds over into almost a religious point of view about the natural world. Now, there's one part where he is visiting. This is in the first chapter. He's visiting Jerusalem. Once on a tour of old Jerusalem, standing near the elevated site of Solomon's throne. Really no greater religious site in the world than Jerusalem and these sites. I looked down across the Jericho road to the dark olive trees of Gethsemane and wondered which native Palestinian plants and animals might still be found in the shade underneath. So it's and he goes on for a little bit, but just think about that. He's in this kind of culturally loaded and freighted sacred space, and he's looking at the trees and the ants and trying to understand the natural world in this sacred ground. And that is an example of the way I think he's very self-consciously trying to. That's what I'd like you to look at, and what I'd like you to respond to in this book, in a good size, the work of biology and study of the natural world as similar to religious study. We'll see this, he'll go into this further as we read, but that's kind of a question to, I think, open up our discussion with on Friday. So have your response done before class on Friday, and then I'll see you in our Zoom live session. All right, talk to you soon.